Now, every time we use aircrack-ng, regardless of the method, aircrack-ng will use the CPU, or the Central Processing Unit, to process the passwords and try them against the handshake. So basically, the processor or the CPU is what's being used in the cracking process. Now, this is usually the default behavior of most tools because the CPU is the brains of the computer, it's the central processing unit, and thus the default component that's used when the computer needs to process data. Now, if we pause for a second and think, a lot of computers also contain another processing unit, which is the GPU. The GPU stands for the Graphics Processing Unit, and it's built and designed so that they can carry out repetitive tasks very quickly. For example, rendering pixels on the screen is a very repetitive task because it literally loops over each pixel on screen and displays data in it. Therefore, the process of key cracking is very similar in its essence to rendering pixels on screen, for example. Basically, it's a very repetitive task because we go through the word list and we take each password in the word list and then try to test it against the handshake and see if it's valid or not. So it's a very repetitive task. And because the GPUs are optimized to carry out repetitive tasks very quickly, they're actually more efficient than CPUs when it comes to cracking. So, if you have a good graphics card, you can use that graphic card or GPU in the cracking process instead of the CPU, and that way you'll be able to go through the word list and carry out the cracking process much faster than if you would do it with the CPU. And that's the main goal of this lecture. I want to show you how to use the GPU in the cracking process instead of the CPU, and we'll see how fast that is compared to the speed that we were getting with the CPU. Now, first of all, before we do anything, you need to have a powerful GPU or at least a good graphics card. We're going to use a tool called Hashcat for the cracking process because aircrack-ng does not allow us to use the graphics card in the cracking. I'm also going to do this from a Windows machine because most GPUs have drivers for Windows and it'll be very difficult to install their drivers for Linux. So if you can install your driver for Linux, then it's okay. You can use Hashcat from Linux exactly the same way that I'm going to show it in this video, but I'm showing you how to do it from Windows because it's actually much easier to install the drivers for graphics card for Windows because most manufacturers release official drivers for Windows, whereas when you go to Linux, you might have to install third-party packages to get it to work. So I have the website here for Hashcat. I'm going to include it in the resources. Now, before you can use Hashcat, you'll have to download the driver requirements for your GPU. So you can see in here we have a list of the drivers that you need to download. So if you have an AMD GPU, you'll need to download the AMD Radeon software. For Linux, you'll have to download the AMD GPU Pro driver, and so on. Now I'm on Windows, so I'm just gonna highlight this and I'm gonna right click and search Google for it. Now you'll see the first result will come up with the right result, so I'm just gonna click it. And then you can see I can download it from here. Installing it is very easy. Just double click the downloaded file, then next, and then your computer will restart and you'll have it installed. Now I've already done all of that, so I'm going to go back to Hashcat and I'm going to go ahead and download the binary of Hashcat. And as you can see now, that's downloaded for me and it's gone in the downloads directory. So it's a zipped file, it's a 7-zip file. You'll need an archive manager to open it. I already have WinRAR installed, so I'm just going to double click it and that's going to be opened in WinRAR. Now I'm gonna click its directory here, click on extract to uncompress it, and I'm gonna choose to uncompress it in my C directory. I'm gonna hit OK, and that'll basically put the files for Hashcat in my C directory. Now the next step is gonna be converting my handshake to a file that's compatible with Hashcat. Now, when we capture the handshake, as we've seen in all the previous lectures, it's usually stored in a file that has a cap extension, so .cap. Now Hashcat can't read the .cap files, so we'll have to convert this to a file that's compatible with Hashcat. Now we can do that very easily using an online tool made by Hashcat. So I have it right here, and again I'm going to include its link in the resources. Now all you'll have to do is just go on Choose File, choose the cap file that contains the handshake, click on Open, and then put the network name in the ESSID field. Now my network name is already stored in there, so it's UPC 723.762. I'm gonna click on Convert. Now as you can see, now this automatically changed the file type to a HCCAPX file, and it automatically downloaded it for me as well. So if I go to my downloads directory, you can see that I have a new file here, and it has a HCCAPX extension. This is the extension that Hashcat can read and understand. Now I'm just going to rename this file, and I'm going to call it Handshake so that it's easier for us to know. Now we're all set. I have my handshake here, and I also have my word list right here, which is called ROQ. And I'm just going to copy both of these files and put them in the same directory as Hashcat. So I put Hashcat in C, so it's in my PC, C, and it's called Hashcat. And I'm going to paste the word list and the handshake in here. Now we're all set. We have our word list and the handshake on the same directory as Hashcat binary. So now we're ready to use Hashcat, and all we have to do is we have to navigate here from Windows command prompt and then run Hashcat against this handshake with the dictionary that we just copied. So in the next lecture, I'm going to show you how to use Hashcat from the Windows command prompt to crack the handshake using the GPU instead of the CPU.